Howdy, my name is Alcio Hernandez, and this is my creative project over the contemporary issues of the Global South. I hope you enjoy. So, to start off, one of the main things that I took, especially from my discussion facilitations, considering two out of the three were over Africa, right? So, one main thing that I took was economy over human rights. So, one of the things that surprised me was how some countries in Africa have put their economic progressions over the betterment of their own citizens, more specifically when it comes down to the Chinese involvement in African economies. So, you might be like, okay, well, in what way did they do so, right? So, like, there were Chinese companies who would go into these African countries to maybe build infrastructure, maybe, create new jobs. The issue was that these countries put this Chinese investment over the betterment of their own citizens. And that is like not cool, right? And I remember specifically during my discussion facilitations, the warm up that I did and the reasoning that I would do that warm up was for us to be able to comprehend this view from the first person. So I would designate people as like, okay, you are China, you are the government officials, you are the people. They would have to say I, right? I, me, you, this, that, rather than they did, or in that case, or if they did this. When you look at it from the first person perspective, you can really see how government officials are, to be quite frank, letting their people down because of this economic investment. And whenever we would do that role playing for my warm ups, there would be the person acting in part of China, like, oh, well, they would be like, oh, well, we're investing, right? We're putting in money and we're creating new jobs. And then the government officials of, for example, let's go with the Congo, for example, they would be like, well, we are, allowing this company, right? We're allowing this Chinese investment to better develop our economy because of colonization, right? These European countries, to be very specific, came to colonize. They took away many of our minerals, and that's kind of the reason that we're impoverished to this day. But then the person or people who would be playing the actual citizens of that country would be like, hey, y'all are committing actual genocide, or y'all are putting money over people. So you might be like, okay, well, give me an example. Well, ASM woman. So as we were able to read throughout, I forget what week it was, but I do remember we did specifically ASM women at one point. These women lacked access to education. Oftentimes, their families did not support them, whether it be financially or morally or whatever the case may be. So these women really had no other choice for the most part than to participate in this labor. And unfortunately, many of their policymakers, many of the people in their government are not enforcing the rights and or not fully supporting ASM women, right? Because these are women who not only have to take care for their families, whether it be their kids, maybe their husband, or whatever the case may be, but they have to not only work in the household, but work out in the field in order to help sustain their families financially. And I do remember during we did this sort of philosophical chairs at one point, and once again, it came back to that economy, to, actually making money, right? They're like, well, this is a third world nation, right? They need to focus their economy beforehand. And that's, don't get me wrong, I'm all for a strong economy, but don't forget the people that actually live in your country. At least that's my perspective. That's what I was able to gain from it all. Money talks, and unfortunately, for some people, money speaks more than it does for others. But that goes into my next thing. The actual during in class discussion facilitation. So I will say by far the one thing that I enjoyed most about this class was the actual discussion facilitation itself, right? Because whether it be me, someone else, say Daniel or Tomas or Wyatt or whoever it was, they would be able to bring a different perspective on the article that we had read. If we watched a movie, they would bring a different perspective of that movie or YouTube video or whatever it was that we watched. They were able to bring in a different perspective. And what I liked the most out of all of it was that, excuse me, was that because these were open ended questions, everyone was able to bring in a different answer, a different viewpoint. And me personally, the reason I worked or I spent so much time into the warm up was just because the warm up itself brought into question the actual discussion facilitation questions. It kind of tied it all together. It kind of tied in everything that we had read from the article to be able to get different perspectives, different viewpoints. Some people would bring up humanitarian rights, other people would bring up economic progression, other people would bring up colonization. For example, I remember one time Daniel, I believe this was his last discussion facilitation actually, that he up Haiti and their issues, right? Some of it was colonial, right? A major portion of it was colonial, but also, for example, I had mentioned, well, a lot of it is also their political turmoil internally. And I don't remember who, but someone else also mentioned that some of it is also just because of geographical reasonings. You know, they live on the island of Hispaniola, which is one, an island which is susceptible to hurricanes. Two, there are mountains there and there are earthquakes in Haiti. So I would say by far the one thing that I liked most from the discussion facilitations was the fact that we were all able to gather together and learn from each other. And I'll say that's one thing that I also gained from this class is that everyone has different viewpoints based on what they have read, what they have heard, and what they have seen. And everyone comes from a different background. But how can we learn to respect that? Because, at least for me personally, being like in the Corps, being in the military, being in a frat, distinct viewpoints are not often liked or tolerated, or sometimes you just can't speak on them point blank, period. I liked how here we were able to learn how to respect one another's opinions over the same topic. That we were able to learn how to grow from each other rather than to bring each other down and rather than to, just shut down someone else's opinion. We were able to learn about these different regions of the world, which unfortunately are oftentimes not talked about. For example, I have one friend, she goes to NYU, and I mentioned this class to her at the beginning of the semester. She was like, "Oh, so the part of the world that no one talks about." I love that for you. I love that you get to be able to talk about, the part of the world that just doesn't get talked about. So I really, really appreciate the fact that I was able to learn not only about this part of the world, but also grow into learning how to respect and appreciate others' opinions on the topics that are currently affecting these people in these countries in so many different parts of Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia. Anyways, that is it. Once again, my name is Asio Hernandez, and I am logging off. Thank you so much.